Hola. So for this morning session, I'd like for us to experientially probe into the issue of who am I? Who am I? You'll recall the final line, or the penultimate, almost final line, in that dialogue between Drona and the Buddha. He said, I am not a man. No, I'm not. And then he said, I'm awake, of course. I think if many of us were just asked, who are you? We might very well say, I'm a man, I'm a woman. Like, that's pretty solid. And I would suspect we feel very confident about that. You know, when you say, I am a man, if I say I'm a man, then two things are immediately implied. I'm a human being, and then between the two genders, I've locked myself in. And so I think a lot of us would say that and say, well, there's a lot more I can say, but if you want the short story, I'm a man, I'm a woman. And a lot of people do identify quite strongly, not only with their species, or our species, but also gender, right? And yet there the Buddha was and said, basically, no, I'm not a man. And he said, I'm awake, so does that not imply, or might it not imply, that when we think, we feel, we say with great confidence that I am a man, I'm a woman, that we may be dreaming that. When we're dreaming something, the appearance is there. But if you really look for it, if I'm dreaming of a certain individual in a dream, so an individual crops up in the dream, and then I really probe into it and try to find, is there a person really there? We might ask questions like, you certainly appear to be a human being, but where did you come from? Especially if you're lucid. But even if you're not, where did you come from? Where do people in a dream come from? And if you ask somebody, you might do this. If you're in a dream, you might ask other people, where did you come from? And see what they say. A lot of you know one of the earliest lucid dreams I had many, many years ago. I was lucid, quite lucid. And I was in a diner, and I was really an evangelist for lucid dreaming, because it was so cool. I wanted everybody to know. So I wasn't that lucid. If I wanted everybody else in the dream to become lucid, not that lucid. But nevertheless, I was quite thrilled, quite excited. And so I went around in the diner, and it was a kind of a classic American diner. Hamburgers, French fries, Coke, and Formica tables, really old-fashioned, 1950s style. And I went from one to the other and said, this is a dream? I was really excited. Do you know this is a dream? Do you know this is a dream? And not a single person who was even interested in the question. They just couldn't get one person even to respond. They just were much more interested in their hamburgers than that, So I'm going to be rambling a little bit, but coming in on this theme, because it's going to directly relate to the meditation. Let's take just a step very briefly back to yesterday. We looked into this Vaibhashika system, where it seems like they really were not even particularly concerned about whether these appearances are really out there in the physical world or not. So just if you leave it unquestioned, like most naive, well, probably all naive realists do, then they appear to be out there. Sure, the wall is white. It was painted with white or beige paint, and the beige paint is over there, and the color of the paint is over there. And are we finished? And the sounds, I heard the sound coming from over there. Did you hear that sound coming from the left? And did you pick up the scent in this room? Did you pick up the scent? It really, it was probably here before we came, yeah? Yeah, probably. We didn't create it when he came up, whatever. And so the notion that all the appearances appear to be there. And in the Vaibhashika, I just don't think they got around to questioning it, because it just didn't seem all that relevant. Whereas entering in this dreamlike notion of taking impermanent as permanent, kind of in a dream, or that which is not a source of happiness as being so, you're dreaming, or identifying with that which is not I or mine as being so, then you're dreaming. Now that's important, because these are really important aspects of why we are suffering. And you cut that out, and you'll see an enormous difference in your life. So that's what they're concerned with. Whereas in Sautrantika, where we'll spend this part of this morning, we'll see, maybe all the morning, then they do get around to questioning that, and they say, it just doesn't make any sense. As Descartes knew, and Galileo knew, and many, many people knew, 400 or 500 years ago and longer, that it just doesn't make any sense that Those colors are not out there, and so then we have this division. And here's getting to an important point. And this is also classical physics. And that is, are we perceiving a room here that was here before we were, and that's made out of atoms, made out of molecules, eventually it will crumble, and are we perceiving that room, or are we only perceiving qualia that arise in the space of the mind, right? Does this room, made out of bricks and mortar and so forth, does the room exist in the space of the mind? Anybody want to give a snappy answer? The room made out of molecules, atoms, so forth, does the room exist in the space of your awareness? Somebody said something. Yes? So some years ago, decades ago, in the space of your mind or my mind? In my mind now. So this room that's made out of bricks and mortars was made in the space of your mind. So when they called in the workmen to build it, they called you in to make sure that they have a space. But if it was made, it didn't move anyplace else, or did it go from the space and then jump into your mind? Okay, I think we probably can't just have a one-on-one, but I will make a point here, and that is, and I'm just going to speak Sautrantika, so this is not debatable, I know what I'm talking about. I'm not refuting you, I'm just saying this is Sautrantika. Sautrantika says, look, it's made out of bricks and mortars, it exists in physical space, it would be here before any of us looked at it, and the building does not exist in the space of anybody's mind, it exists in physical space. And it obeys the laws of physics, and that's in physical space. The appearances of the room arise in the space of the space of awareness of human beings and birds and crickets and anybody else who wanders by. But then there's a difference. That is, the appearances arise in the space of the mind, but bricks and mortars don't exist in the space of the mind. Space of the mind isn't physical, and bricks and mortar are. Okay? That's the Sautrantic view. I'm not asking anybody to agree with any of this, but you might be interested, and that's why, presumably, why you're here. And so then they say, well then, are you seeing, and this is going to be the crucial point, are we right now perceiving the room, or are we only perceiving appearances in our mind? And here's the answer from Sautrantika, okay? And I'm going to be refuting some of this later on, so I'm not asking you to believe it now, but it may be helpful, because I know for myself, when I was 34, I'd been a Buddhist monk for 11 years, and I wanted to study physics. What I really wanted to study was quantum mechanics. And what I really wanted to study was see how quantum mechanics related to emptiness theory in Madhyamaka. That's what I wanted, right? And I hadn't studied physics or calculus or mathematics for 13 years. And I went to really one of the best colleges in all of the country, Amherst College. And so I didn't want to do a cheesy New Age version. They wouldn't have allowed that anyway. It's an outstanding college. And so I went back and I studied trigonometry and calculus, elementary and advanced calculus, and I studied classical physics and electromagnetism and advanced mechanics and so forth, and then I earned my way up to quantum mechanics and relativity, so when I got there and was presented with Schrödinger's wave equation, I could actually do it and understand it. So that's the honest way. If you just say, oh, but who cares about classical physics, let's just study quantum mechanics, no physicist will ever take you seriously. Because you really can't understand quantum mechanics unless you've learned its foundation. And it's difficult to understand Madhyamaka if you skip the basics. I'm not saying you can't. And so here's the point then. Sautrantika, are we seeing this room made out of bricks and mortar? Yes, we are. How are we doing that? By way of appearances. I'm looking over there, I see appearances in the right space of my mind, but by way of them, I am seeing the wall. Otherwise, nobody sees anything out there in the physical world, but we do. Everybody knows that. We see the town of Lampeter, we see the wall, we see other people, and so we're seeing what is out there in the physical world that exists. Now, Sautrantika, we're seeing what exists out in the physical world that exists by way of its own inherent existence, objectively real, independently real. In other words, Sautrantika is not questioning metaphysical realism. There's a real world out of there, and they say it's a real world made of atoms existing in objective space. Sautrantika, right? And it's objectively real, so it exists whether anybody's looking at it or not. But we sentient beings, all sentient beings, our only way of perceiving the world is by way of the appearances arising in the space of our awareness. So by way of. And virtually all scientists believe that today. Virtually all. We'll see some exceptions who wind up being very, very provocative. But the standard thing, if you study high school physics or middle school physics, what have you, this is going to view you're going to get. And so, then we can ask, how do we perceive each other? Again, Sautrantika. Sautrantika, how do we perceive each other? So that's the room, we see it by way of, and so then for each other. So I'll come back. I don't know your name. I don't have one more, but
Victoria.
Victoria, thank you, Victoria. So one other person don't have to pick on you all the time. So Victoria's right in front of me, and so I'm looking there, she's so clear right there, and say, am I seeing Victoria? And Sautrantika says, yeah, of course you are. I mean, she's right there, she's play side. Am I seeing Victoria? Yeah, how are you? Oh, you mean her body is Victoria? No, her body isn't. Her body is a body. A body is not a human being. And that's all I see. I don't see her mind. But I'm seeing Victoria by way of her body. And who would deny that? Unless you're a complete materialist and you say, her body is Victoria. But I don't believe that. Many people don't. And then if I turn my head away and say, Victoria, can you say your name again? Please? That's fine. I just heard Victoria. I just heard Victoria speak again. And so I apprehended Victoria this time by way of her speech. Her speech is not Victoria. Speech isn't a person. But I can apprehend you by way of your speech. I could hear you talking outside. Oh, you hear Victoria? She's outside. Did you hear her? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Me too. I heard her. By way of her voice. Her voice isn't Victoria, but I can apprehend you, recognize you. Oh, I heard Victoria walk by. Did you hear? Yeah. Me too. I know her voice. And so, by way of your body, we can apprehend you. By way of your speech, we can apprehend you. And then, if I were clairvoyant, which I'm not, if I were clairvoyant, I would start picking up Victoria's thoughts and memories and say, oh. Yeah, there's Victoria. Interesting memories, interesting imagery. So now I'm apprehending Victoria by way of her mind, okay? Victoria can do the same thing. I think you probably do. You look into the mirror and you see yourself by way of, or just look at your body like that. You can perceive yourself by way of your body. You can see a lot of it. You can hear your own voice. Oh yeah, that's my voice. And then you can observe, without being clairvoyant, you can observe, look within. And you say, yeah, I was looking at my thoughts. I was looking into my mind, and I was perceiving myself by way of my thoughts, my emotions, my memories, and so forth. So by way of, right? So we have these two things. Perceiving the external world, which Sautrantika never questions really, and by and large the whole Theravada tradition, and that means the Pali Canon also, virtually never, almost without exception, never questions whether the external world is really out there when nobody's looking. They don't question it. And that goes for the five skandhas, your body, your feelings, recognition, mental formations, and consciousness. In Sautrantika, in the Theravada also, they're all inherently real. They're inherently real. And then what exists but isn't real? My cell phone exists, it's real, but its ownership is not real, right? Because it belongs to the center, but nobody ever sees that. It's just a way of talking. And anything that's merely a way of talking, the borders between countries, ownership, the name of a company, how many shares does a company own, et cetera, these are things that are true. The value of currency, it's just paper, right? You can't even eat it. And yet it has value. Why? Because people say so. And if suddenly people stop saying so, it doesn't have any value unless you just like scratch paper. So the value of currency, that's one more thing. Does it exist? Of course it exists. It's not real. Bitcoin, if there's anything that's not real, it's Bitcoin. And yet does it exist? Absolutely. Well, not absolutely, but relatively to people believing that Bitcoin has value, then it trades and it fluctuates, goes up and down and down. So there's many things like that. But coming back to the good hardcore classical physics of Sautrantika, okay, you can talk about the fact that it's an Apple telephone or an iPhone rather than an Android and so forth, just a way of talking. But want me to show you how real this is? Listen closely. You can call it an Android, a paperweight, you can call it an iPhone, you can call it the best phone in the world, you can call it a crappy phone, you can call it garbage. It doesn't matter what you call it. I'm speaking as Sautrantika now. I'm saying, Madhyamaka, get real. This is real. If you can hit me on the head, that's about as real as it gets. If I'm crossing a street, whether I conceptually designate the car as a car, that's real. You can call it a car, a lorry. You can call the hood the bonnet or the hood, the trunk or the boot. It doesn't matter whether you call it a trunk or a boot, it's really there, right? This is good, hardcore, common sense Sautrantika speaking. We'll move on to the meditation now quickly. But to see the point here, this really is very consonant with mainstream physics. It's Sautrantika, it's classical, it makes really good sense. It's not stretching our imagination or making our jaws drop. But then we can ask, is it seamless? Because classical physics, by the end of the 19th century, by the premier people in the world, Lord Kelvin, J.J. Thomson and so forth, just before Einstein, Max Planck, quantum mechanics and all of that, it was absolutely metaphysical realism. It really hadn't been doubted in the whole history of science. Number one, Christianity. I mean, the Genesis, God created it all, and almost all of them were Christian until the late 19th century. And so they didn't doubt it, and they thought they were pretty much finished. But it turned out there were assumptions there that could not withstand very deep scrutiny, and they blew up in the form of quantum mechanics and relativity theory. This is classical Buddhist philosophy, and it looks really good and has a lot of pragmatic value. Classical physics is still as useful as it ever was. It's just the underlying assumptions turn out to be false. And it's true within a limiting, rather than being universally true. If you don't look down to a level of particles and you don't travel near the speed of light, it's true. But it's never been true that there's absolute space or absolute time, absolute matter and absolute energy. That's just totally false. It's not limited true, it's just totally false. But practically speaking, classical physics is an accurate description of what actually goes on. So we're going to move to the meditation now, because we're seeing what goes unchallenged. In Vaibhashika, naive realism goes unchallenged because they got more important things to do, the 3 marks of existence. In Sautrantika, it has greater sophistication, and a lot more can be said about causality, the depth of their insight into causality. I found very, very impressive. I still do, 45 years after I was introduced to it. And then when it comes to the self, so we hear a lot about non-self, one of the 3 marks of existence, right? Impermanence, dukkha, and then non-self. Let's just kind of look at this briefly, and that will lead right into our meditation. One thing is, the Buddha never said you don't exist, that people don't exist, I don't exist, you don't exist. There's no such thing as a self. People have not studied very well often leap to that, but it doesn't make any sense. And the Buddha never said it. He did say not self, anatta, or no self on occasion, but then specifically what did he mean? Did he mean that really I don't exist at all? And the answer is clearly not. Every good scholar knows that. And people don't know, then they write books and confuse a lot of people. But when the Buddha, on the day of his enlightenment, when he said, take no external refuge, be an island unto yourself. What's that? Take an island, be nobody? Be an island unto yourself, take no. So he used it, and Bhikkhu Bodhi has sent me a number of passages from the Pali Canon where the Buddha makes, references to, like self-confidence and so forth and so on. So it doesn't make any sense. All right, so it doesn't make any sense to say not at all. Then we can ask, and now we bring in a sharp knife, what exactly is being refuted? And this is equally true in Vaibhashika and in Sautrantika. These two are called, so they're very much in tune with the Pali Canon. And here it is specifically. And this is going to bring us right, this is not just a philosophy lesson, this is going to go right into practice to see whether what I'm about to say accords with your experience. So what exactly is being refuted? In Tibetan, I memorized it, I haven't forgotten it. Rangyatupa. Rangyatupa. Rangyatupa means autonomous. Just that, Rangyatupa. Zeyut means substantial, really there. Rangyatupa, zeyut ki da. A self that is autonomous and substantial. Okay, that's a direct translation. It's a good translation. But what does that mean? The self that is being refuted, that appears to exist, we dream that he exists, I dream that I am such and such, and yet it's just not true. It's just flat out not true. So let's look at it now, let's put it into ordinary language. If you have this sense of you're believing in, sensing, thinking, asserting that you do exist as someone, a person, who is autonomous and substantial, what that means is that you have a body, and the body's inherently real, substantial, and so forth, and you have a mind. That's a big umbrella term, but you certainly have one, and it has many, many functions in it, just like your body has many organs and all of that. But in addition to the body, in addition to your mind, there's also you. And you don't exist independently, as if you could take away your body and take away your mind, you'd be left over. They don't believe that. But autonomous in the sense that you're really there. You're really there. And one analogy they give, I think is very helpful, is if you owned a very small company. I was thinking of the terminology today. It comes directly from the classic literature, the analogy I'm about to give. If you owned a small company where you had, let's say, administrator, secretary, and then you had a COO in charge of operations, and then the CEO, okay? Small company. Then you have 3 people running it. And the CEO gets to tell the COO and then the administrator what to do, because he or she is the boss, right? But the 3 people there. And one's the boss, and the other 2 follow what the boss says, unless they don't feel like it. Sometimes they may mutiny. And so there's 3 of us here. I'll speak first person now. I've got a body, and you want to see how obedient my body is? You want to see it again? Right hand, come up. You can go down now. I did that. And I'm going to think about peaches. Yep, they just came up. And so I've got my body, and it says, yes, sir, often, but not always. In my mind, I say, peaches. Peaches come up. And so my body is real, my mind is real, and I have both of them. And I'm the commander-in-chief. They mutiny on occasion. They don't always behave, but pretty well. And I'm here as much as my body is here. And so people could say, I'll say something nice. People could say, oh, this is kind of silly. Alan, I want to say something nice about my body. For a 69-year-old, you don't look too bad. How's that? You look okay. For a 69-year-old, you look pretty good. Well, somebody just praised my body. And then somebody could say, Alan, your mind's pretty quick. So somebody, I guess that's good. Somebody can praise my mind. But then somebody could also say, Alan, you're swell. That's not my body, that's not mine. That's me. That's me. I'm swell. That makes me happy. You think I'm swell? I'm swell. So you can praise me in 3 different ways. You can praise my body, you can praise my mind, or you can praise me. And of course, we can flip that around. And I don't need to do it, but you can denigrate, oh, blah, 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 your body, blah, blah, your mind, and then you're a jerk. I don't mean your body, I don't mean your mind, I mean, you. You're just a jerk. Have you noticed? You're just a jerk. Just a jerk. I don't even know what jerk means, but I know it's not very nice. Right? And so that notion, do you have that sense? And that's where we're going in the meditation. Do you have a sense of being someone in here who is just as real as your body, just as well as your emotions? Boy, are they real. Are you just as real? Not independent of, but in charge of. You're the CEO and the owner, the proprietor. This is my body. You can't touch it without my permission. Okay, toggle rule, but apart from that, my body. And don't mess with my mind. This is my mind. Hands off. And so do you have a sense? You have a sense of being someone really in here. Not independent of the body and mind, not identical to them, but right there amongst them, like the CEO, right there in the company, in charge, calling the shots. So let's check that out. So let's go into meditation, and we will follow the Buddha's actual instructions to Bahia that addresses this topic directly. And we are, in this daytime dream yoga practice, in the context of Sautrantika, we are addressing the question, are you really here? You as an individual, a person, I? Are you really here? Or are you dreaming that? That you appear, but you don't actually exist at all as such a person. So, let's see where this takes us. First we settle down, we relax, loosen up. And step by step, going from coarse to subtle. We settle first the body in its natural state, then the respiration, and then the mind. Now we turn to this pith instruction, a guided meditation by the Buddha, to this wandering ascetic, a shramana named Bahya, who sought him out at great length, traveled across India to find him, requested teachings. On the third time, the Buddha responded to his request for guidance. And he said the following, one of the shortest discourses the Buddha ever gave. Bahya, you should train yourself thus. In the seen, let there be only the seen. So let's do that right now. Resting your awareness in stillness as you did at the culmination of settling body, speech, and mind. With your eyes now wide open. And without conceptually projecting anything on this visual field or any of the appearances arising within it, just see what reality presents to you. You're not making up the colors, you're not imagining the forms. They're dished up to you. So perceive nakedly, without interpreting, conceptualizing, intellectualizing. In the seen, let it be just the seen. Take it straight. See what is there, see what is not there. Is it not true that you're simply seeing colors and forms arising in the space of your awareness? Do you see anything else? It continues in the herd. Let there be only the herd. As you single-pointedly focus your awareness on the auditory domain and whatever sounds arise. Keep it simple, keep it non-conceptual. From moment to moment, what comes up in that auditory field? Keep it real. You'll recall in Sautrantika, what is real is what you can directly perceive before you label, conceptualize, project. That's real. In the sensed, let there be only the sensed. And we know what he's referring to here is the sensed, meaning tactile sensations, which you perceive with tactile perception. Direct your attention now to the somatic field and observe just as nakedly, in pure perception, just whatever arises within this third domain of experience. Tactile sensations, feelings within the somatic space. In these sensations, the variety, the range of sensations, the feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, just see them for what they are. Naked, raw, directly presented by reality. And then in the mentally perceived, let there be only the mentally perceived. As you turn your attention to the sixth domain, the space of the mind, whatever you perceive there, be they objective appearances like images, or be they subjective mental processes like desires, feelings, just observe them for what they are. What reality is presenting to your awareness, it's real. And don't clutter it up with your imaginary superimpositions, projections. This includes awareness itself. You directly perceive. Awareness, the experience of being aware, that's not something you imagine or conceptualize or merely label. You directly perceive it. So see it nakedly, without superimposing any constructs, labels, associations. Thus, Bahia, you should train yourself. The Buddha continues, win for you, Bahia. In the scene, there is only the seen. In the herd, there is only the herd. In the sense, there is only the sensed. In the mentally perceived, there is only the mentally perceived. Then you, Bahia, are not found by way of that. If we review this process, the visual, auditory, tactile, and the mental, apart from imagining, imputing, or dreaming, I, or mine, are you in fact seeing yourself, this person, the referent of the word I? Are you in fact really perceiving yourself? By looking at visual imagery, as when you look in a mirror. By way of sound, for example, when you hear your voice. By way of tactile sensations, when you experience your body. And then centrally, up close and personal. Are you perceiving yourself, the thinker, the experiencer, the feeler, the cognizer? Are you indeed experiencing yourself by way of thoughts, memories, images, all the activities of the mind, by way of consciousness itself? Or is that just a dream, a projection? A conceptual construct superimposed upon reality, but having no reality of its own. He says, you are not found by way of that. Is that true? Are you, the person, the individual, the referent of the word I, or your name, are you in fact found? Can you identify yourself by way of sight, sound, touch, or by way of your perception of mental events? Are you anywhere to be found? Or is that just something you imagined, you dreamed up? Aren't these appearances all empty of you? And is there any evidence that you're behind them? Access by way of them? Examine closely. What's real and what's imaginary? The Buddha continues, when you, Bahia, are not found by way of that, by way of any of these appearances, sensory or mental, when you are not found by way of that, then you, Bahia, are not over there. Where those appearances are, sensory and mental, they're empty of you. You're not found. At most, you're just projecting yourself, but it's not real. You're not over there in any of these appearances. They are just appearances, identityless and without owner. When you, Bahia, are not over there, then you, Bahia, are neither here nor there. If you're not over there in the appearances, are you over here as some real subject in here? Where are you as the subject who apprehends these appearances? Where are you found? Are you really found in here? If so, what do you look like? Can you find yourself in here as the observer? Or is it just awareness, empty of I? Not a person. When you, Bahia, are not over there, then you, Bahia, are neither here nor there, nor in between the two. You're not in the appearances, you're not by way of appearances. You're not in here by way of consciousness. You're not found in between, appearances over there, awareness over here. You're not in between either. When you, Bahia, are not over there, then you, Bahia, are neither here nor there, nor in between the two. This is itself the end of suffering. And that was the end of his talk. And by the end of his talk, Bahia became an arhat and was totally free. The fastest of all the disciples of the Buddha. So let's linger on for a few minutes. By simply placing mindfulness, simply observing with bare attention. This is pre-vipassana. There's no inquiry. It's just mindfulness. But when we introduce the element of inquiry, that's when it becomes vipassana. Can you in fact perceive yourself, observe yourself, by way of any appearances at all, sensory or mental? Can you find yourself within the matrix of appearances? Or are they just appearances? And subjectively there is awareness. Are you awareness? Are you inside awareness? Does it have an owner? Is awareness a person? Or is it just awareness, empty of you? And apart from the appearances, and apart from the awareness of appearances, are you found anywhere else as the one who perceives appearances, the one who has consciousness, the one who is aware? Can you identify yourself apart from appearances and awareness? And if so, what do you look like? What do you perceive when you look for yourself? And if you conclude these appearances are empty of you, awareness is empty of you, and you're nowhere else to be found, then rest in that knowing, that cognizance of the unfindability of you as an autonomous, substantial agent, person. So yesterday morning when we passed by briefly this Vaibhashika view, again we left naive unrealism unchallenged, but raised enormously important existential issues of ways that we're really projecting on reality what isn't there and living in a kind of a dream world, imagining that things that are utterly impermanent are actually very stable and reliable, things that are not really sources of happiness, or they really are, and things that are not really I or mine at all are really mine, we're dreaming. And so the daytime dream yoga of Vaibhashika would be to recognize when that happens. It doesn't happen all the time. We don't always do that. But on an occasion we slip into non-lucidity. And we take these things very seriously. This is stable, this really makes me happy, this is really mine, and so forth. And to see when that happens, and do a reality check. So in lucid dreaming, and my data is totally out of date. So if you take Charlie's retreat soon, I'm sure you'll bring this up to date probably to yesterday. But I've not really looked into the lucid dreaming literature much since I was working with Stephen LeBairs. So I'm certainly antiquated in some ways. But relying on my antiquated database, as I listened again and again, 6 workshops, and I've read his books, there's just not much questioning of the nature of reality in the waking state. It's just, is it waking, in which case it's real, or did my nose just get longer, in which case this isn't real, this is a dream, and then you become lucid in the dream. Whereas, and that's fine, it has limitations, but incredibly effective for many, many people to help them become lucid, so that's a tremendous surface. Vaibhashika, of course, is limited in many ways as well, but it is raising these fundamental issues that address the issue, why are we suffering? And showing how we slip into kind of a non-lucid dream state time and time again, whenever we're imagining as in dreaming, that things are more stable than they are. That things are, that really either one, that this out here really makes me happy, source of my happiness, or this out there is really the source of my unhappiness. We're dreaming. It's just absolutely not true, but we can imagine it to be true, just like taking a dream to be real. And then the whole issue of I and mine. Here, this was a very simple method that Buddha was laying out there. And I find it very profound. And so there is, in this distinction between what is real is what immediately presents itself without any layovers, without interpretation, just naked, raw, have a dose of reality, whoosh, and you get colors and sounds and tastes, and you get emotions and thoughts and feelings and consciousness and memories and dreams. Dreams are as real as anything else in Sautrantika. They're not less real than waking experience. They have causal efficacy, and you directly perceive them. So anything you can, so let's just detail this. When I first was introduced to this when I was 23 in the monastery, I thought, wow, does this make sense? And that is whatever you can directly perceive, that has, from its own nature, by its own side, with its own power, whatever you can directly perceive, that in and of itself has causal efficacy. It does things. It on its own can influence things. So you see a reflection of yourself in the mirror, and that reflection can trigger all kinds of emotions. Happy, sad, bored, whatever. And so that reflection, which actually exists 6 feet behind the mirror, because that's if you're 6 feet in front, that's where it is. Well, of course, it's not there, but that reflection does have causal efficacy. I mean, who can doubt that? And who can doubt that thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and so forth have causal efficacy? So just line these up. See if it makes sense to you. This is not the ultimate view at all in Buddhism, but when I was introduced to it as the entry level, just like when I studied physics, entry level was classical physics. Classical mechanics, classical electromagnetism, advanced mechanics, and on. You enter there, and you need to understand that. And then you need to see how relativity theory and quantum mechanics punch great big holes in it. Not just here or there, but fundamentally challenge and even torpedo underlying assumptions about the nature of reality as a whole. And that was a revolution, because if you understand relativity theory, quantum mechanics, you can never become a classical physicist again. You can't go back. Just like if you really understood what Galileo discovered, you can't go back and think, well, for a while I believed that the Earth was in the center, but then I believe the sun was. But no, actually I believe now the Earth is in the center again. You can't go back. If you did, you never got it in the first place, right? That's a revolution. Darwin, it's a revolution. If you've understood what he discovered, you can't think of human beings being totally separate from all of the rest of the animal kingdom. You can't believe that anymore. And you can't believe that species are static over time. If you still believe that, you never understood it in the first place. But if you do, you can't go back and think of static species over the last 3.5 billion years since there have been animals on the planet. And so we're speaking of revolutions here. Revolutions here. If you really see the impermanent as impermanent, the dukkha as dukkha, not self as not self, you can't go back. These are deeper revolutions. They're existential revolutions that will how do you say, have tentacles, again, having influence going into every aspect of your life. This is really deep. And so what we're raising here is, again, we're not veering towards the conclusion, oh, I get it, I don't exist at all. Because that just doesn't make any sense. If you say that, then who just said that? And to say nobody said that, well, if you're nobody, then you can't draw any conclusions. So that's not the answer. But it's a sharp knife. We are here. The Buddha acknowledged that repeatedly, and no school of Buddhism says you don't exist at all. It's only in pop Buddhism that people don't know what they're talking about. But in all schools, there is a challenge of the way we commonly perceive ourselves, have a sense of ourselves, affirm ourselves, that may be really dream-like. And so we had our daytime dream yoga yesterday. Look to see when you become non-lucid. Look to see when, not all the time. This thing about the delusion, it's not constant. I mean, if you're psychotic, that could be quite constant, but I don't know about that. Leave that to the psychologist. Maybe that's pretty constant. I just thought of a memory where there was a woman who was clearly psychotic. She was one of the three. I'll tell you the story. It's very brief. It's a pretty interesting story. It's one of the three women. It was about 1972. And she'd been taking a lot of drugs, and she was psychotic. I think that was plain for everybody to see. Young woman from Germany. And there were just a few of us. I didn't even know her, but they brought her to Dr. Dunnan's clinic, so I became involved. And we were really, really afraid that she would harm herself. And Dr. Dunnan didn't have any medication for any of these people. Tibetan medicine isn't strong for mental disease. It's just not strong. It's okay, one more limitation. There we are. And so my old friend Gavin Kilty, who's now one of the best translators of Tibetan Buddhism on the planet, he's really outstanding. Well, we knew each other back in 1972. And so Gavin and I, we took this young lady by the hand. We said, okay, Tibetan medicine isn't working. She can't go to Dharma classes, forget about it. And her boyfriend had abandoned her. And Gavin and I just, okay, let's see if we can take care of, see if we can do something to help her. So Gavin and I took her by the hand, make sure she wouldn't jump over a cliff or something. We took her by the hand from MacLeod Gunge down the winding road to the library. And we were hoping to meet Tijan Rinpoche, one of the tutors of the Dalai Lama, an awesome, awesome Lama. He's one of my Lamas. He wasn't available. He just wasn't there, so we couldn't. So then we went to, we saw Geshe Ngawang Taige, who was our Lama, and he wasn't there either. But Sharpa Rinpoche, his interpreter, was, this young Tulku. And he saw this woman we're kind of holding on to, and she was quite clearly, I mean, she was obviously really not mentally well. And Sharpa Tulku said, okay, these lamas are not available right now, they're just not accessible, but try this. And this is what I saw with my own eyes. He brought out a little pouch, and he had some relics, like a little bit of fabric or relics of lamas who really were holy beings. And he brought out a pinch of these relics from one of the great lamas, and he put it on a little dish, and then he lit it. He put a match to it, and then blew it out, and then he put it right under her nose and said, breathe in. So smoke's coming up from this. Breathe in, he said. And she could speak English, and she breathed in. And I think you can imagine what I saw. Suddenly her face completely came into it, just rested in repose. Just like that, just suddenly. And it lasted for 10, 15 seconds, just. And then you see the eyes starting to go. And she said, do that again. For a moment, everything was okay. As I saw. That was attention from something. What was that attention from? It was a very memorable experience. He didn't cure her. But just to see, wow, because she didn't know what's going on. She's really out of her mind. And she's breathing some smoke. So there was no placebo effect there. She didn't have a clue what we're doing. Just breathe in, okay, and that. But then to see this rapid change, but then it was like pointing out instructions. Oh, and I know where this came from. It was like pointing out instructions. For 15 seconds, she was really sane. From her account, and to look at her, well, she's just a relaxed young lady. And then she slipped right back into the old routine. And she did need medical help, and that's eventually then we helped her get down to Delhi, and she went back to Germany, and she got professional care, which she needed, because none of us could provide that. But why I mentioned that is that I was saying, remember, that psychosis, which I know nothing about, may be constant, but in her case, this is why it came up, it wasn't constant. She had a little lapse of not being psychotic, and then slipped back into the rut. But for us, we're not psychotic. And we're also not constantly and evenly delusional. As human beings, that is, we're not constantly seeing the impermanent as permanent and so forth and so on, but it comes up in these little bouts of relative insanity where we're slipping into a dreamlike space where we're really thinking, oh, this person, this is the one I've always, but this person will make me so happy. Or this job, oh, this is the dream job. Don't we say that? This is the dream job. This is the dream house. This is the dream car. That's exactly it. You're dreaming. You're dreaming. You've just slipped into a non-lucid dream. And that goes for permanence, and this really makes me happy, and now this is really mine. This is really mine. This is I've discovered who I really am. Dreaming. But now we'll go a bit deeper than that. And if you like a daytime dream yoga practice day for Sautrantika, because we're upping the ante here. We're going to more and more subtle, more and more sophisticated, and there's a large consensus in all of Tibetan Buddhism. I said in Western philosophy there's very little agreement, and I heard in one conference, I can't remember, I think it was one conference, it was fairly recent, there was a whole conference of philosophers, and one got to the podium and said, well, one thing about us philosophers, we never agree on anything. And one of the philosophers in the audience said, I don't agree with that. So it's fun. And again, I'm not ridiculing philosophy. There's so many brilliant insights, really brilliant. And it's also true they don't agree. But some amazing insights from philosophy, East and West. So here we are. So for our daytime dream yoga today, if you'd like to venture into it, it could be quite interesting. Daytime dream yoga, and it's something very simple. Throughout the course of the day, between now and the time you actually fall asleep, you might on occasion think, it could come up. It could come up. I'm hungry. I need to go to the bathroom. I want to go for a walk. When the thought comes up, check to see what's the referent. What are you referring to? Are you referring to your body? Are you referring to your mind? Or are you referring to something else? Tibetans comment on this, it's a very nice little anecdote, but if you want to find, and this is here really Sautrantika, a good classic chunky philosophy, but if you want to see what's being refuted, because it's not I altogether, it's a conjured up I, that's a conceptual fabrication that in fact reflects nothing at all. So at least there is a border between Wales and England. I mean, there is one, there's agreement, but this is something conjured up that has no reality at all. Right? If I thought that I was actually Napoleon, and not reincarnation, that's conceivable, but if I thought right now I am Napoleon Bonaparte and started speaking in a French accent and putting my hand here, I could really be quite persuaded that I'm Napoleon, and there's no Napoleon here at all. So some things that we conjure up are relatively true, like borders and ownership and so forth, but we can also conjure up things that have no reality whatsoever. And that's kind of important too. There's no part of Napoleon here at all. So if I think I'm Napoleon, it's just flat out wrong. That's not existent. That's just right? So that's important. But if you can, as many times as you can throughout the course of the day, when you just notice the thought of I coming up, check out the referent. And the anecdote I was about to say, Tibetans often comment on this, it's very helpful, is if somebody falsely accuses you of something, I don't think I need to give an example, but something not nice, okay, stealing or whatever. If somebody falls and they point, okay, can I use you as a target? You're now part of my prey. But I will give an example. I'm sure I brought my wallet here on this time. I wanted to show you something, my wallet, and it's... She's the nearest one. Okay, Victoria, fess up. It was right here, and I turned my head away. I won't punish you, but you really are a thief. I said I wouldn't do this, right? But she's smiling. But if I were serious, and of course I'm not, when we're falsely accused of something, how do we feel? I didn't do that. And the sense of I comes up like a great big cloud. How could he accuse me of that? Don't you know who I am? did not do that. And the eye is like boom, like an atomic bomb. You could pick it, you could punch it with your finger. Who is this I? Because I didn't accuse your body of stealing it. I didn't accuse your mind of stealing it. Thief. It's you. And see what comes up. It can be praise, it can be blame, but especially false accusation. It triggers I. Check out the referent. What actually comes to mind when you said, I didn't do that? That's it. So that's a reality check. Stephen Lever's, pull your nose, etc., etc. This is a reality check. Is there such a thing as having an authentic, non-delusional? Is there such a thing as having a non-delusional sense of I? The answer is yes. In all schools of Buddhism, not every sense of I is false. But some are. And here's the hypothesis. If you think that you are there as the one who's in charge of and owns your body and mind, and you're just as real as they are, you might check that out. And that's a reality check. That's daytime dream yoga. So just to finish something I find really fascinating, and that here's how things line up in the Sautrantika. See whether it makes sense. This system I'm about to share with you has major flaws in it, just like classical physics. But whatever can be directly perceived, including the use of technology, that's real. It exists from its own side. It has causal efficacy. Anything that cannot be perceived, even in principle, like the ownership of somebody owns this building. The ownership of it, well, that exists, but you'll never perceive it. Because it's only something people agree upon. And therefore it exists, but it's not real, right? And so then to distinguish, here's another kind of daytime dream yoga practice in Sautrantika. It's very important, and it comes up a lot in the mindfulness movement, to its great credit. And that is distinguishing this whole theme, because I know it very well. I've known John Kabat-Zinn since 1992. Old friend, very good man. And the emphasis there in mindfulness-based stress reduction and overall the mindfulness movement, which has helped many, many people. I think it's limited. Well, so what? But it helps many, many people. And a major aspect of that whole movement is just be aware of what's happening, not judgmentally. Don't throw all your gunk at it. Just be aware of what reality is dishing up from moment to moment, and just deal with it. Just be present with it. And that's helped. That simple theme has been very, very helpful for many people. And what are you doing there? When you're simply attending with bare attention to whatever's coming up from moment to moment in a non-judgmental way, as John Kabat-Zinn defines mindfulness. It's not a Buddhist definition, but it never has been, isn't now, but it's a very useful one for many people. What I just said is fact. That when you're doing that, what you're distinguishing is what's reality dishing up in contrast to what are you dumping on it. Now that's very useful. If we put this into Sautrantika, then we can say reality is dishing up is real, and what you're dumping on it may exist, like this is my cell phone or whatever, or it may not even exist. We of course, we superimpose, we transfer, we project, we preconceive things that have no truth at all, but then we conflate things that have no truth at all with reality, and then, the trouble starts. But I thought you meant, but I thought you intended, I thought you were thinking, I was wrong. How many problems come from that kind of thing? We're assuming things that just were never true at all. So we're here to alleviate suffering. So there's three things going on here. And bare attention, the whole mindfulness movement, and now we see from the discourse to Bahia, get real. What directly presents itself to you from moment to moment, that's real. That's as real as it gets. And it's equally real, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, and so forth. It's real. And then recognize what you're superimposing on that, which may exist, like ownership, and is this a college, or is it a university, or is it a high school? You're never going to discover that. What do people say? And they'll tell you, university, secondary school, that's something people say. It exists, but you'll never perceive it, right? So distinguish with bare attention what's reality dishing up, and then with intelligence, recognize what we're superimposing that exists, but only conventionally, and has no causal efficacy. When people believe in the conventions, the belief, that's real. Believing something is mental activity, that's real. And believing something has causal efficacy. But stranded all by itself, without anybody believing it or disbelieving, to say this belongs to the Santa Barbara Institute, That's a fact. That fact has no causal efficacy. It's only when people believe it, disbelieve it, or whatever, that has causal efficacy. So these things that are merely designated, they may exist or they may not exist at all. Like I'm thinking I'm Napoleon. So that's the reality check. That's daytime dream yoga. Generally, is be very present what actually was presented, what was superimposed conceptually, and among the things conceptually superimposed, what's true and what's not true. It's not true that I'm Napoleon. It is true that I'm an American citizen. But does anybody ever perceive that? And how did I become an American citizen? My mom had me in Pasadena. That's all it takes, you know. Get dropped in America, you get a passport. But clearly, that's just by convention. Trump wants to pull that one back again. You know, keep people who don't look like me out or look like him. And so, but being an American citizen, it's true, but it's not real. It can be revoked at any time. If Trump learns what I'm saying, I might be in some peril. Revoke my citizenship. So this is very, very useful. And then a final point, it's just too good to pass up. That which is real has causal efficacy. That which exists but isn't real does not have causal efficacy. It has no power from its own side. That's the thing. The ownership of this from its own side, without anybody believing it, knowing about it, perceiving it, it's not even there. It has no efficacy. It's only when people believe it, then their belief has efficacy, like in the placebo effect and so forth. And then among causality, just try this one on. Because when I was introduced to this, and we were debating 5 hours a day back then, and memorizing the text, it was a full-time job. Causality. If something is real, like a pair of eyeglasses or an emotion or a planet, anything, mental, physical, what have you, if anything's real, then everything that is real arises in dependence upon prior causes and conditions. And among the causes, something has to transform into it. So we have the primary cause, or the substantial cause, is something prior transforms into something later. It used to be a seed, and now that seed has shifted over and has become a sprout. The stuff of the seed turned into the stuff of the sprout. And that's called the substantial cause, the primary cause. But you never get a sprout without something turning into the sprout. You can't wave your hands and have nothing turn into something. I listened to this and said, well, that really makes sense. And I'd studied science quite a bit. From the age of 13, I was planning to be a scientist. Age 13 to 20, you pick up a lot of science that way. And so you never get something from nothing. You always have something transform into something else. So there's a stalk of corn, but had there been no kernel of corn, you can have all the fertilizer and water and tractor and manual workers and so forth, and soil and sunshine. You're never going to get a stalk of corn if you don't have something that actually transforms into it, and that primary cause, substantial cause, is the kernel of corn. Then many contributing factors, the contributing factors contribute to it, but they don't actually turn into that thing itself. And so here, these are big statements, but causality is kind of important. It's the Four Noble Truths is all about causality. We're suffering, how come? Then we go to causality. And we don't go to supernormal or supernatural agency. We look within the world. So whether it's mental, whether it's physical, you name it, whatever condition phenomena, real phenomena, there's always something that transforms into it, but it's never enough for there to be one cause only. This is also very important, practically speaking. And that is if we point to somebody and we just say, this person just makes me so miserable. Every time I see this person, I'm unhappy. I think of the person, I hear his voice, I read about him. This person just makes me so unhappy. He just so bugs me. As if there's one cause of my being unhappy. It's him. He makes me unhappy. Ever had a feeling like that? Or this person makes me so angry. This person makes me so happy. This person makes me feel so calm. Or this place is so, I just love it. It makes me feel so safe and secure. I really love it. And this restaurant, this restaurant just, it makes me so happy. We point to one thing as if that alone will do it. And then the whole of nature, the whole universe, ready for a big statement? In Sautrantika view, in the whole of the universe, one cause never causes anything. If this person makes me happy, it was a dance, baby. I contributed something. My attitudes, my views, my. It's not just him. Yeah, he triggers it, but I've got to participate here, right? It's always more than one. So there's always a substantial cause, something that has to transform into it, and there are always contributing circumstances. And they facilitate, they coordinate, they enable. So the substantial cause by itself can't turn into anything. All by itself, contributing circumstances can't transform into the thing. They just help out, like a tractor that plows the field. It doesn't turn into the corn, but had the tractor not plowed the field, the crop of corn would not have grown. So I just listen to all of that. And anything that is a cause is also an effect. And anything that's an effect is also a cause. It's just an ongoing matrix, and there was never any first cause that had no cause before it. It just causes going back and causes going to the future. You never get something from nothing, and you never have something transform into nothing. It just transforms into something else. And that's just the whole of reality. It's a worldview, right? And I listen to that and say, wow, that really, really, really makes sense. And moreover, when A transforms into B, A loses its identity. So you start out with a kernel of corn, and then you bring in the mulch, the water, the sunlight, and so forth. And then you can watch this, of course, second by second. And as that kernel of corn germinates and then sprouts, and then the stuff of it turns into the sprout, then after some time, there's no kernel of corn anymore. There used to be, but now there's no kernel of corn. There's a stalk. And so there was an identity shift. It was a kernel, was a kernel, was a kernel. Oh, now no more kernel, now it's a sprout. And that's everywhere. That A transforms into B as a substantial cause of B, A loses its identity as it transforms into B. Then B transforms into C and it loses its identity as B. It's not transmigrated. It's not like a kernel of corn looking like a sprout and a sprout looking like ashes. There's no inherent identity, right? They are just transforming into something else. So this is a principle that was discovered and then mathematically formalized in physics by Hermann von Helmholtz about 1865 or so. The conservation of matter and energy. Conservation of matter was Lavoisier, 18th century, and then 1865-ish, then Helmholtz, conservation of energy and matter. Matter was already covered by the chemists, but now the physicist, he was really a polymath, Helmholtz. But then he mathematically formulated, when it comes to energy, you never get something from nothing, and whatever kind of energy it is, it's electrical energy, it's gravitational energy, it's thermal energy, and so forth. Energy never transforms into nothing, it transforms into energy and is always conserved, and prior forms of energy transform into other kinds of energy. And so these were two parallel tracks through the 19th century. Matter always turns into matter. Lavoisier found that. It's a gas, it turns into a solid turns into a liquid turns into a gas, into a flick, and so forth, but it never turns into nothing, and you never get any matter coming out of nothing at all. That was Lavoisier, conservation of matter. Helmholtz, conservation of energy. Einstein, put them together. Mass energy. They're convertible to each other, but you never get mass energy out of nothing, and it always transforms into another configuration of mass energy. And then with general relativity theory, then we find space-time as a player. Because space-time used to be inert. It just sits there, right? And things happen in time and they happen in space, and Einstein blew that one out of the water. You can never look at space-time again if you've understood Einstein. That space-time has causal efficacy. It bends. So the planets going around the sun, they're all going in a straight line. That's what things do. I mean, Newton told us that. Things go in a straight line unless you bump them. All the planets are going in a straight line in curved space. Space, and then it's space-time. That's really weird. Space-time actually alters the movement of physical entities because they're moving in a straight line. But the space-time itself is warped. And it's not only space. This is totally creepy. Time gets warped. What does that even mean? But it's true. A lot of empirical evidence behind it. Space-time never comes out of nothing. You don't have nothing and then, whoosh, there's some space-time. And space-time can't, how would you destroy space-time? You hit it with a missile? A hammer? How would you make space-time vanish? It can't. But space-time changes. It warps, it woofs, it flattens out, and so forth. It keeps on changing into different configurations of space-time, right? But it never becomes nothing. It does influence matter, but it doesn't become matter-energy. This is very important. And matter-energy never turns into space-time. So they act as cooperative conditions for each other. Isn't this cool that this philosophy developed 1,500 years ago is now working in absolutely cutting-edge modern physics? Because it really works. Space-time is conserved, matter-energy is conserved. And what modern science hasn't figured out yet, but maybe they'll catch up, consciousness is as real as anything else. Consciousness is real. Space-time is real. Matter-energy is real. And you never get something from nothing. And never do you have matter-energy transformed into space-time, and never does matter-energy turn into something non-physical, like consciousness, or emotions, or dreams. And they're so obviously non-physical, how can anybody seriously doubt it? When you can't measure them physically, and they bear no physical attributes when you observe them, it's just an obvious fact. Our emotions, our thoughts, our desires, our dreams, our perceptions, our memories, consciousness itself, they're just obviously not matter, energy, or space-time. That should be as obvious as the nose on your face. And so the notion that matter transforms into consciousness, I don't know anybody actually believes that. That neurons, or synapses, dendrites, whatever, that they actually transform into mental states? That would be crazy. Because mental states are not physical, that means they're invisible to physical systems of measurement. So if there was some gangly of neurons that was actually transforming into a state of consciousness, and you're looking at those neurons through a microscope, you'd see them disappear. And I guess the more you think, the less brain matter you would have. Because your neurons would keep on turning into emotions, and by the time you get to be an old man, you just, huh? Your brain would be totally empty. I saw I've used up all my neurons. This is silly. Who can believe that? That's crazy. But to believe that consciousness comes from nothing, that synapses and dendrites, they wave their fingers and they have complex interactions, and then they all contribute to consciousness, and they help nothing become consciousness? Who can believe that? Thomas Huxley said, this is like believing that, rub a lamp and a genie pops out. So consciousness doesn't come from nothing. It makes no sense. It's not natural. It's not like anything else in nature. If that were true, then it's not like anything else in nature. But there's no evidence for that. So consciousness doesn't come from nothing. Consciousness doesn't pop out of space-time. Nobody believes that. And who believes that consciousness, emotions, mental subjective experience pops out of or is transformed into from neurons? It makes no sense. So this is the great big missing piece for modern science. They haven't quite... It's going to be such a revolution that people will resist it at the last moment, because they stake their whole reputations on something that was false. The belief that everything boils down to only space-time, matter, energy, that is the core belief of materialism. And then to say, well, you missed something. All of experience, all of qualia, every mental state, and all of consciousness. You just wanted to say that was an attribute of matter? Give me a break, there's no evidence. Matter doesn't have non-physical attributes. And non-physical things don't emerge out of physical things. Get real. We're just saying something simple, that consciousness is as real as anything else. And it's not derivative of anything else any more than space-time is derivative of matter or vice versa. There are three fundamental elements of the universe, and none of them transform into the other. But this means in your first moment of consciousness in this lifetime, presumably in your mother's womb, there was a point at which, in this lifetime, you became conscious in the first moment. It had to be, right? Because your consciousness, this woman, this man, your consciousness didn't exist 50 years ago. This woman's consciousness, this man's, didn't exist. Because you didn't exist. Not as this woman, you're not 50 years old. And so in your parents' womb, there was some point, whether it's right at conception, when the egg and sperm came together, a bit later, I don't know when, but there had to be a first moment, because you're conscious now, or you're doing a very good imitation. You're conscious now. And so where did your first moment of consciousness come from? It got conditioned by many things, the formation of the brain and so forth and so on. But that first moment, it had to have occurred sometime. It has to be a first moment, because it hasn't been always around here. Where did that first moment of consciousness come from? There's no evidence it comes from the brain at all, and it's just a categorical error. It didn't come from nothing, it doesn't come from space-time. So the most obvious solution would be, it just must have come from a prior mode of consciousness that transformed into this consciousness. That prior one we call a bardo consciousness, the consciousness of the bardo being, the traveler in transit. And then that bardo being dies. When you are conceived, that bardo being checks out and transforms into you. And then you're transforming moment to moment, and eventually you'll die. Your body will transform into something else, and your mind will collapse into the substrate consciousness, and that will transform into the substrate consciousness of somebody in the bardo, and it'll no longer be you. I look at this, wow, that makes sense. And every competing theory, I don't see anything that stands up to it. And this has evidence, and you can test it. So, that's a little bit of Sautrantika. I found it as compelling, if not even more compelling, than classical physics, which I think is incredible. And it's probably time to take a break. Yep, let's do. Now's a good time. More very interesting material coming up. To my mind, very interesting. We're going to hang out in Sautrantika for a while. It's worth more than a morning. Because this unpacks, when I was studying it, and then studying Buddhist psychology, right afterwards, we studied Lodik, and then we memorized that text and debated it 5 hours a day. It was really a marvelous introduction. But especially this right here, the Sautrantika. And then we studied the mental factors, 51 mental factors, ways of knowing, memorized the text, debating it, and so forth and so on. It was really a brilliant education, and it's been tested now for like 500 years. They're giving the same education for hundreds and hundreds of years in Tibet. If it works, don't fix it. But I have to say also, because I didn't continue, I didn't become a geshe. I bailed out pretty quickly. But not out of lack of interest or I got disillusioned. It was just that when I was studying this and just seeing, wow, this makes so much sense. And it was all in the mode of debate and memorization. It was all very intellectual, I thought. Because I'd already been exposed to the 4 applications of mindfulness before I ever went to India. And it's just, the book I read was a modern classic by a German monk named Nyanaponika, The Heart of Buddhist Meditation. I read it in 1970. And that was the first book on meditation I read that I thought, that is incredible, and I can practice that. I couldn't practice Dzogchen, I didn't understand it. I was inspired by it, I couldn't practice it. But these 4 close applications of mindfulness, called 4 foundations of mindfulness, where you really radically empirically, you investigate closely your body and its relationship with the physical environment. And you closely apply in a mode of inquiry and careful scrutiny. How do feelings arise? How do they manifest? Are they permanent and impermanent? How do they vanish? Then the whole array of mental events. How do they arise? Where are they located? How do they influence each other? What influences them? What do they influence? And you're just looking. It really is science. It's contemplative science. And then broadening out to the wide angle to phenomena and seeing outer phenomena, inner, physical, mental, and how they are all arising in mutual interdependence in this theme of causality. I was introduced to that when I was living in Germany before going to India. I thought, this is incredibly helpful. And then I got the theory 3 years later when I was studying this in the monastery. And I thought, there's the theory and there's the practice. And why aren't we putting this together? Why are we debating 5 hours a day and memorizing and reciting text and text and text and then doing puja? Where's the practical application? It was like studying only theoretical physics and having no lab. Because I'd studied physics, I studied biology, chemistry, and you study it and you have a lab. You study, you have a lab. You go back to the empirical research. And that was why I left. This is brilliant material, but why are we not putting this to the test of experience? And the 4 applications of mindfulness, this is a marriage made in heaven. Because the 4 applications of mindfulness are the lab work. And you don't have to believe anything at all. This is not religion. This is really just careful scrutiny of the constituents of your life. And then the theoretical framework for it, like experimental physics and theoretical physics, the theoretical framework with Sautrantika was just a perfect fit. It made so much sense. And this close application of mindfulness, you are distinguishing between what's reality dishing up and what are you superposing on reality. So I took Goenka's course. I'm just chit-chatting about myself. I'm wasting your time. But in 1974, after just immersing myself in this, and I wound up being the only Westerner there in this monastery. All the other ones were Tibetan. Because the 2 other Westerners, they both got sick, cholera and hepatitis. They didn't come back. I got hepatitis 3 times, but I stayed. And then Goenka came to town. And His Holiness told all of us in the monastery, go take that retreat. I didn't want to. I was happy as a Tibetan Buddhist. What did I need Theravada for? But he said so. So the boss said so. So we all went down there. I remember one Tibetan monk, I remember exactly. He's sitting there and Goenka's giving us 11 hours a day meditate, mindful of breathing, scanning through your body. I remember one monk, he said, the hell with this. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme. He just waded through. Om Mani Padme Hum. I'm not doing this crap. Om Mani Padme Hum. Well, I understand. But I did. I went for it. I did the mindfulness of breathing 11 hours a day, the body scanning 11 hours a day for the last 6 days. And by the time I finished, I thought, I can't do this intellectual stuff anymore, not by itself. I've strayed too far from experience. I've just strayed too far. I could die any time. I almost died the third time I got hepatitis. Almost, really, really close. I thought, okay, I can die any time. I can't die just doing the intellectual stuff. It's got to be unified with practice. So like one day after, maybe it was the same day the retreat was finished with Goenka, I asked for an audience with His Holiness, and I was granted it. He was my primary Lama already. I went up to him and said, Your Holiness, this education I've been receiving is great, but I don't want to do it for a while. I just want to meditate. And I want to practice the 4 applications of mindfulness. That's what I want to do. But I want to discontinue my training here. And frankly, I was terrified. I really was. Because I so revered him. And I thought he might say, you numbskull, you're getting the best education we can possibly offer and you just want to turn your back on it? What's wrong with you? And you're doing well too. What's wrong with you? I didn't know what I'd say if he said that. I didn't know what to say. I was really afraid. You might just say, well, you're just, that you might just say, don't do that. That's a bad idea. Stay here. Become a geshe. Finish. I was really terrified. So I told him, this is why I don't want to continue. I just want to go back to experience. Because this is too much, too removed from experience. And he listened to me and said, you're right. Yeah, go for it. Go for it. Here's one of my tutors. He'll help you. Lajir Rinpoche. Lajir Rinpoche will help you. Go for it. Good. Wow. So that was just chit-chat. Wasted your time. Sorry. But the union of these two is really spectacular. It is. Each one by itself is great. Put them together, oh, incredible. Okay, chit-chat, blah, 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 blah. 5 minutes past, let's come back at 35 minutes past the hour. We'll go right back to meditation.